Hello, everyone. I'm your sleep sinners for tonight, here to guide you into a peaceful and mysterious slumber. I know many of you use these videos to help you fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time is it for you right now. Go ahead, get comfortable, relax, and let the rain and stories take you away. Voices under Vesuvius, Italy. The screams hit Francesca first. Distant, desperate, and absolutely impossible. "Guys, do you hear that?" she whispered, stopping abruptly on the ancient cobblestones. Her friends kept walking, their attention fixed on their tour guide's dramatic gestures as he described how pyroclastic flows had entombed the citizens of Pompeii in 79 C. Nobody else seemed to notice the voices. Not the elderly American couple photographing everything in sight. Not the bored teenagers trailing behind their parents. Not even Luca, who stood beside her checking his Instagram notifications. But Francesca heard them clearly. Children crying for their mothers, men shouting warnings, women begging the gods for mercy. All coming from beyond the crumbling wall marked Vietato l'accesso. No entry. Her phone buzzed. The GPS map of Pompeii showed her location. Inside a building that wasn't on the visitor's map. Inside a tunnel that, according to official records, didn't exist. That's when she saw them. Fresh footprints in the ancient dust, leading toward the seal wall. Footprints that belonged to people who had died nearly 2,000 years ago. Earth to Francesca. "You coming or what?" Luca's voice pulled her back to reality. 21 years old with perpetually tousled dark hair and the easy confidence of someone born into old money. He was staring at her with amused impatience. Behind him, their friends Elena and Marco were already following the tour guide around the corner. "Sorry, did you hear anything weird just now?" Francesca asked, tucking a strand of her curly black hair behind her ear. Luca raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like people screaming." He laughed. "Bro, this whole place is literally a disaster site. Your imagination is just an overdrive." He nodded toward the tour group, disappearing ahead. "Come on, we're falling behind." Francesca reluctantly followed, unable to shake the chill that had settled between her shoulder blades. This weekend trip to the ruins had been Luca's idea, a double date that was more about posting aesthetic pics than actual interest in history. She was only here because Elena had begged her to come along and balance out the group. Their tour guide, Matteo, was a middle-aged man with a deeply tanned face and an encyclopedic knowledge of Pompeii that he delivered with theatrical flair. As they rejoined the group, he was explaining how the city had been preserved as a perfect snapshot of Roman life. The volcano did not just kill, it preserved, Matteo explained, gesturing broadly. Like a photographer developing film, Vesuvius captured a single moment, August 24th, 79 CE. The baker's bread still in the oven. Children's toys abandoned mid-play. An entire civilization frozen in time. Francesca half listened as she checked her phone. The GPS still showed her in an impossible location, and the app kept glitching, the blue to jumping between their actual position and somewhere off the official path. "You okay?" Elena whispered, linking arms with her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Francesca forced a smile. "I'm fine, just the heat." But as they moved through the ancient streets, past the plaster casts of huddled victims and preserved frescoes of daily life, the voices returned, softer now, almost conversational, as though the dead were simply going about their business, unaware that their world had ended millennia ago. Francesca studied her friends' faces for any sign they heard what she did. Nothing. Elena was posing for photos that Marco was taking, while Luca narrated everything for his Instagram stories. None of them noticed when she drifted away from the group, following the strange sounds to that same crumbling wall. Up close, she could see it wasn't original to Pompeii. It had been built more recently, maybe decades ago, to seal off what appeared to be a tunnel entrance. But at the bottom, where the wall met the ground, something had broken through from the other side. A gap just large enough for someone to squeeze through if they were determined. And those footprints, small, delicate impressions in the dust, led straight to it. She knelt down, examining one perfect print. It couldn't have been more than a day old. Interested, no? Francesca nearly jumped out her skin. Matteo, the tour guide, stood behind her, head tilted with curiosity. "You shouldn't be in this section," he said, but his tone was intrigued rather than scolding. "What drew you here?" "I heard something," she admitted, "and my GPS keeps saying I'm somewhere that isn't on the map." Matteo's expression shifted subtly. Technology often malfunctions here. Something about the minerals in the volcanic ash. He paused. "What did you hear exactly?" "People. Talking. Screaming sometimes. Like they're still here." Instead of laughing or dismissing her, Matteo glanced around to ensure they were alone. "There are stories," he said softly, "among the guides and archaeologists. Things we don't share with tourists. About certain areas of Pompeii where the veil between then and now grows thin." He nodded toward the wall. "That tunnel was sealed in the 1970s after 3 researchers went missing for 2 days. When they were found, they were babbling about impossible things. Living Romans, a city untouched by the eruption. They were dismissed as suffering from heat stroke or hallucinations from toxic volcanic gases. "But you don't think so," Francesca said. It wasn't a question. Matteo's weathered face creased in a sad smile. "I think Pompeii keeps its own secrets." He checked his watch. "We should rejoin your friends. They'll be wondering where you are." As they walked back, Francesca asked, "Have you ever heard them?" The voices. Matteo was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "My grandmother used to say that Pompeii isn't a city of the dead. It's a city where the dead never realize they died." He tapped his temple. "The mind plays tricks in places like this, where tragedy is so concentrated." But she noticed he hadn't actually answered her question. "Francesca, are you even listening?" Elena waved a hand in front of her face. They were sitting in a cafe just outside the archaeological park. Late afternoon sun casting long shadows across their table. Luca and Marco were comparing photos, arguing over filters. "Sorry, what?" Francesca blinked. Elena rolled her eyes. "I was saying we should hit that club in Naples tonight. The one with the rooftop view." "Yeah, sounds great," Francesca answered automatically, her attention drawn to her phone, where she'd pulled up articles about Pompeii's unexplored areas. There was surprisingly little information about the sealed tunnel Matteo had mentioned, just vague references to structural concerns and ongoing excavation planning. "You've been weird all day," Elena said, lowering her voice. "Is it about that guy from your archaeology class? The one who ghosted you?" Francesca shook her head. "No, it's nothing." She hesitated, then asked, "Did you notice anything strange during the tour? Any odd sounds? Besides Luca's commentary on the ancient brothel frescoes?" "No." Elena studied her friend's face. "Why?" Before Francesca could answer, Luca interjected. "Hey, check this out." He turned his phone toward them, showing a photo he'd taken of Francesca standing alone near a wall. Freaky, right? In the background of the image, barely visible in the shadows behind her, was a silhouette of what appeared to be a person, not a tourist. The figure wore what looked like a toga, and its edges were strangely blurred. "That's just a shadow," Marco said dismissively. "Or a guide in costume," Elena suggested. But Francesca felt her heart race. The photo had been taken exactly where she'd heard the voices. "When did you take this?" she asked. Luca shrugged. "When you wandered off. I was going to caption it, girlfriend ditched me for ancient ruins or something. I need to go back, Francesca said suddenly. What? Now? Elena looked bewildered. They're closing soon. Tomorrow then, before our train. Seeing their expressions, she added, for my archaeology thesis, Professor Bianchi would kill me if I didn't gather more research while I'm here. Nerd alert. Luca teased, but agreed they could delay their departure by a few hours. That night in their rented apartment, while the others slept, Francesca pored over maps of Pompeii on her laptop. The official excavation diagram showed nothing unusual where she'd encountered the wall, but historical maps from the 1960s marked something there, an area labeled Passaggio Incompleto or Incomplete Passage. She also found a forum thread from amateur archaeologists discussing rumors of a network of tunnels beneath certain areas of Pompeii that predated the eruption, possibly emergency escape routes or private passages for wealthy citizens. Most have been deemed too dangerous to explore due to structural instability. But what caught her attention was a comment from someone claiming to be a former site worker. The tunnels weren't sealed because they were dangerous. They were sealed because of what was found inside. Items that couldn't possibly have been there. Modern items. A notification popped up on her phone. A text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Eastern Gate tomorrow, 8 a.m. Bring good shoes. Matteo. The morning air was cool and sharp with the scent of lemon trees and coffee from nearby cafes as Francesca approached the eastern entrance to the ruins. She left a note for her friends claiming she was meeting her professor for early research. Matteo was waiting, dressed not in his tour guide uniform but in practical clothes, hiking pants, sturdy boots, and a backpack. He looked surprised when he saw her. I wasn't sure you would come, he said. I heard them again last night, Francesca admitted. In my dreams. Matteo nodded grimly. That happens. The voices follow some people home. He handed her a small flashlight. We don't have much time. The first tour groups arrive at 9, and we need to be out of sight by then. As they entered the park through a staff entrance, Matteo explained in hushed tones, what I'm about to show you is strictly prohibited. I could lose my job, or worse, but I've been watching you. You have what my grandmother called the ears. The ears. The ability to hear across time. It's rare, but it happens here more than anywhere else. They moved quickly through deserted ruins, morning light casting long shadows across ancient walls. Pompeii felt different without tourists, more authentic, more alive somehow. The official story is that Pompeii was completely destroyed, Matteo said as they walked. But there have always been inconsistencies in the archaeological record. Items found out of sequence. Structures that suggest people continued living here in some capacity after the main eruption. That's impossible, Francesca objected. The pyroclastic flow would have killed everyone instantly. Almost everyone, Matteo corrected. But what if some parts of the city were protected? What if some residents found shelter underground? They arrived at the wall from yesterday. Matteo looked around cautiously, then pulled aside a section of fake stone, a cleverly disguised access panel, revealing the entrance to a tunnel. The researchers who disappeared in the 70s, he said. One was my uncle. When they found him and his colleagues, they were physically unharmed but mentally changed. They insisted they had spent weeks in ancient Pompeii, a version that never fell to Vesuvius. He shone his light into the darkness beyond. My uncle spent the rest of his life trying to get back there. The authorities dismiss him as traumatized, but I've been studying his journals for years. The footprints you saw, they're fresh every morning, no matter how often the area is cleaned. You think people from ancient Pompeii are visiting? Francesca asked incredulously. Or maybe time isn't as linear as we think, Matteo replied. My theory is that certain volcanic minerals, under specific conditions, can create temporal anomalies. bubbles where time overlaps. Francesca thought about the voices, the impossible GPS location, the figure in Luca's photo. And you want to find one of these bubbles. I want to document it, Matteo corrected, pulling a digital recorder and electromagnetic field meter from his backpack. Scientific proof. He ducked through the opening, and after a moment's hesitation, Francesca followed. The tunnel beyond was surprisingly well preserved, with smooth walls of fitted stone. It sloped gently downward, cool air flowing upward from depths unknown. "This doesn't look like emergency Pompeii construction," she whispered. "It's too precise." Because it wasn't built in panic, Matteo agreed. These tunnels were planned long before the eruption, possibly as private passages for the wealthy to move between their properties unobserved. As they descended deeper, Francesca's phone lost signal. The GPS app showed them bouncing between impossible locations, sometimes in the middle of the Bay of Naples, sometimes kilometers away in modern Naples. After about 10 minutes of careful progress, they reached a junction where 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. The central passage was partially collapsed. "This is where they found my uncle," Matteo said quietly. He claimed the cave and wasn't there when he entered. The EMF meter in his hand suddenly spiked, its display flashing red. At the same moment, Francesca felt a pressure change in her ears, like descending rapidly in an airplane. And then she heard them again, the voices, clearer now, conversations in Latin and early Italian dialects, the sounds of commerce and daily life. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Matteo's face had gone pale. "No, but the readings." He held up the EMF meter, which was going haywire. "This is exactly what my uncle described." Francesca moved toward the right-hand tunnel, drawn by the voices. "It's coming from this direction." Francesca, wait. But she was already moving, compelled by something she couldn't explain. The tunnel narrowed, the air growing warmer, humid. The voices grew louder with each step. No longer distant echoes, but conversations just around the corner. And then the tunnel ended in a solid wall of stone. Except it wasn't solid. As Francesca approached, her flashlight beam passed through it, as if the wall were merely mist. Beyond, impossibly, she could see sunlight. The sounds were crystal clear now. A marketplace in full swing, vendors calling out their wares, customers haggling. "Matteo," she called back, her voice shaking. "I think I found one of your bubbles." When Matteo reached her side, his scientific calm had evaporated. "Dio mio," he whispered, extending his hand toward the wall. His fingers disappeared into it up to the knuckles. He pulled back as if burned, though his expression was one of wonder, not pain. "The recorder," he said urgently, fumbling with his device. "We need evidence." But when he activated it, the device emitted only static. The EMF meter's display had gone blank. Technology doesn't work at the interface, Francesca realized. Just like my phone glitching. Matteo nodded grimly. "My uncle said the same thing. No evidence passes through." He hesitated, then added, "Except memories." The implication hung between them. "You want to go through," Francesca said. It wasn't a question. "I've spent 15 years searching for this moment." His voice trembled with emotion, to prove my uncle wasn't crazy, to see what he saw. "But you don't know if you can get back," she pointed out. My uncle did. All 3 researchers did. Matteo's eyes were fixed on the misty portal. They said they spent weeks there, but only 48 hours passed here. Time moves differently on the other side. Francesca thought about her friends, who would be waking up soon, expecting to find her note about meeting a professor. By the time they realized something was wrong, how long would she have been gone in their timeline? "I'm going through," Matteo decided. "You should return to the entrance." If I'm not back in 3 hours, get help. But Francesca knew she couldn't turn back. Not when the answers to the voices that haunted her were just on the other side of that impossible wall. We go together, she said firmly. Safety in numbers. Matteo looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded. Stay close. Don't interact with anyone unless absolutely necessary. We observe only. They approached the misty boundary together. Up close, Francesca could see through it more clearly. A sunlit street lined with shops, people in tunics and togas going about their business, utterly unaware of being observed from another time. On 3, Matteo whispered. 1, 2, 3. They stepped through. The transition felt like walking through a waterfall without getting wet. A momentary resistance. Then release. The tunnel behind them disappeared, replaced by a complete, vibrant ancient world. The first thing Francesca noticed was a smell. Cooking fires, animal dung, incense, and a pungent aroma of garum fish sauce from a nearby shop. The colors were vivid. Buildings painted in bright reds and yellows. Far more colorful than the faded ruins she toured yesterday. No one seemed to notice their sudden appearance, which was strange given their modern clothing. They can't see us, Matteo whispered, watching a woman walk past close enough to touch. Not at first. My uncle said it took hours before anyone acknowledged their presence, as if they had to become synchronized with this timeline. They moved cautiously through the streets, taking in a living version of what they'd seen as ruins. Street vendors hawked hot food from carts. Children played with wooden toys in the shadow of shrines adorned with fresh flowers. Everything Francesca had studied in textbooks was here, alive and functioning. The date, she suddenly realized. What date is it here? Is this before the eruption? Matteo pointed to a public announcement painted on a wall. Look at the consul's name. If I'm reading correctly, this is 78C, a year before the disaster. They continued their exploration, making notes of details archaeologists had gotten wrong or never discovered. Matteo was particularly excited by the interior colors of home that had been misidentified in modern research. But as they rounded a corner near the forum, something impossible caught Francesca's eye, a modern sneaker print in the dust. Matteo, she called softly. Look. He crouched to examine it. Recent, very recent. Another visitor from our time? Or, he looked up, troubled. My uncle mentioned something similar. He said they weren't the only ones crossing between times. They followed the footprints, which led them toward a large villa on the outskirts of the forum, one Francesca recognized from her studies as belonging to a wealthy merchant named Numerius Papitius Ampliatus. The footprints disappeared at the villa's servant's entrance. Unlike the main streets, this narrow alley was deserted. We shouldn't enter private property, Francesca whispered, if we become visible to them. We just need to look, Matteo insisted. This could explain everything. As they hesitated at the entrance, a young servant emerged, nearly walking into them. He stopped, blinked in confusion, and then impossibly focused directly on Francesca. "Tu," he said in Latin. "You. The master expects you." His eyes seemed to look through her even as he addressed her. Francesca froze. "He can see me?" Matteo grabbed her arm. "We need to leave. Now." But before they could retreat, the servant called over his shoulder, and a distinguished man in an expensive toga appeared in the doorway. Unlike the servant, his gaze was sharp and direct. He was seeing them clearly. "Ah, the visitors in the future," he said in perfectly understandable Italian, though with an ancient accent. "Please enter. We have much to discuss about the calendar, about the coming darkness, and about how you will help us prevent it." The villa's interior was archaeologists' dream. Vivid frescoes depicting mythological scenes, intact mosaics underfoot, and furnishings that would have long since rotted away in Francesca's time. But neither she nor Matteo could fully appreciate it, both frozen in shock at the man's words. "You know who we are," Matteo finally said. "Of course." Their host gestured them to follow him deeper into the house. "You are not the first to cross through the passages of time, though most arrive less deliberately than you have." He led them to a private atrium where a table was set with fruits, bread, and wine. "I am Numerius Propitius Ampliatus, though you may already know this." He smiled at their stunned expressions. "Please sit. You must have questions." Francesca found her voice. "How do you speak our language? How do you know about the future?" Numerius settled onto a couch. "I have had many visitors from your time. The first appeared nearly 10 years ago, distraught, confused. He spoke strangely, but I understood enough. Over time, I learned your language from subsequent travelers. My uncle," Matteo breathed, "was one of them a man named Antonio Russo?" "Indeed, a scholar like yourself." Numerius nodded. "He stayed with us many weeks before finding his way back." Matteo leaned forward intently. "What did he tell you?" "Everything." Numerius' expression darkened. "About the mountain, about our city's fate, about the day when fire will rain from the sky and bury Pompeii in ash and stone." A chill ran through Francesca. "And you believed him?" "Not at first, but then others came telling the same tale, and I began to notice." He pointed to an object sitting in a niche, a modern wristwatch. "Items that could not exist. Materials unknown to our craftsmen. Eventually, I accepted the truth." "So you know you're going to die," Francesca said softly. "All of you." Numerius smiled enigmatically. "That remains to be seen." "What do you mean?" Matteo asked. "Knowledge is power, is it not? Your people study our ruins to understand how we lived and died. But what if some of us use your knowledge to ensure we did not die at all?" He walked to a cabinet and removed a roll of parchment, spreading it on the table. It was a detailed map of Pompeii and the surrounding countryside, far more precise than any ancient map should be. "Your uncle was most helpful in identifying safe zones," Numerius explained. "Areas where the destruction will be less severe. We have been preparing, building reinforced shelters, storing provisions, planning evacuation routes." "You're trying to change history," Francesca realized with growing alarm. "We are trying to survive," Numerius corrected. "Is that not the most basic human instinct?" Matteo was shaking his head. "But this isn't how it happened. Pompeii was destroyed. Nearly everyone died. In your history, yes. But history is written by survivors, is it not?" Numerius' eyes gleamed. "What if there were survivors your historians never knew about? What if we established a new settlement under a different name?" The implications were staggering. If Numerius and others survived using knowledge from the future, they could potentially alter the course of history in untold ways. When Francesca asked urgently, "When do you think the eruption will happen?" "According to your records, next summer. We have been preparing for months already." He gestured toward a side room where they could see crates of supplies and what appeared to be crude gas masks constructed based on descriptions from future visitors. "This is wrong," Matteo said firmly. "You can't change what's meant to happen." Numerius' expression hardened. "And who decides what is meant to happen? The gods? Fate? Or is it simply that you prefer your version of history to remain undisturbed by our survival?" An uncomfortable silence fell. He had a point. Who were they to insist these people accept death when prevention was possible? "There's something else you should understand," Numerius continued. "The passages between our times, what you might call temporal bubbles, they are not natural phenomena. They were created." "Created?" Francesca echoed. "By whom?" "By us, or more specifically, by the priests of Apollo using knowledge they have guarded for generations. New Marius lowered his voice. There are certain minerals in the mountain, crystals that, when properly treated with specific oils and exposed to the correct astronomical alignments, create doorways. That's impossible, Matteo objected. Such technology didn't exist in ancient times. Did it not? New Marius raised an eyebrow. Or is it simply that evidence of such knowledge was buried with Pompeii? History has many gaps, young man. He stood, moving pull aside a curtain, revealing a small altar set with unusual black crystals. The priests discovered it by accident during a ritual when Vesuvius released certain gases. They learned to recreate the effect, to peer into other times, and eventually to create stable passages. So the tunnels we found, Francesca began, were built specifically to house these gateways. Yes, hidden from common knowledge. New Marius nodded. After your uncle's visit, I persuaded the priest to create more, hoping to learn everything possible about the coming disaster. Outside, they heard a commotion, shouting in the street. New Marius frowned. The warning signals. Vesuvius is smoking again. It did that regularly before the eruption, Matteo said, alarmed. Minor activity that people ignored. We no longer ignore any signs. New Marius moved purposefully to gather a cloak. I must check on our preparations. You are welcome to remain here until I return. After he left, Francesca and Matteo exchanged troubled looks. If he's right, Francesca said slowly, if they've been creating these temporal gateways for years, then the entire archaeological record could be compromised, Matteo finished. Items from our time finding their way into the past. Historical figures making decisions based on knowledge of future events. And if they succeed in escaping the eruption, the ripple effects could be enormous. But another, more immediate concern struck Francesca. How do we get back? New Marius mentioned my uncle found his way home, but he didn't say how. Matteo looked grim. Let's search the house. There must be clues. They moved carefully through the villa, examining every room. In what appeared to be New Marius' private study, they found a journal written partly in Latin and partly in modern Italian, apparently notes from his conversations with visitors from the future. Look at this, Francesca called, pointing to a diagram that depicted the tunnel system they'd used to enter. Certain junctions were marked with astronomical symbols. These must indicate when and where the gateways open, Matteo said, studying the markings. According to this, the passage we use will reopen at sunset today. So we're trapped here until then, unless we find another way out. Matteo continued flipping through the journal. Here, he mentions that strong emotional states can sometimes trigger a crossing. Fear, specifically. My uncle and his colleagues reported feeling intense terror before suddenly finding themselves back in their own time. Convenient, Francesca muttered. So we just need to terrify ourselves on command. A distant rumble interrupted them. Not thunder, but something deeper coming from the direction of the mountain. Both froze, listening as it faded. That wasn't supposed to happen today, Matteo whispered. Not according to the historical record. Another, stronger rumble followed, and the floor beneath them trembled slightly. Unless... Francesca's eyes widened with horrified realization. Unless our presence here, all these interventions across time, have somehow altered the timeline. What if we've accelerated the eruption? They rushed to the window. In the distance, Vesuvius was crowned with an ominous plume of dark smoke. Nothing like the massive column that would signal the catastrophic eruption, but definitely more activity than should be happening a year before the disaster. We need to find New Marius, Matteo said urgently. If this is happening now, his people need to evacuate immediately. They hurried into the streets, now filled with concerned citizens looking toward the mountain. The Romans seemed alert but not panicked. This level of activity from Vesuvius wasn't unusual, but given what Numerius and his circle knew, they were taking no chances. They found him in the forum, conferring with a group of men in religious garb, presumably the priest of Apollo he'd mentioned. "Ah, my guests!" He greeted them, surprisingly calm. "You witness our early warning system in action. These minor tremors are nothing to fear, but we use them as drills to practice our evacuation procedures." "This isn't right," Francesca said quietly. "The timing is wrong." Numerius drew her aside while the priest continued organizing crowd. "You speak of your historical records, but consider this. What if your records have always included the effects of our interactions across time? What if history as you know it already accounts for what we're doing now?" The philosophical implications made Francesca's head spin. He might be right. There was no way to know if their presence here was creating a new timeline or had always been part of the original history. "The passages," Matteo interjected. "We need to return to our time before these tremors get worse." "Indeed," Numerius agreed. "The disturbances sometimes affect the stability of the gateways. Come, I will show you a more direct route." As they followed him through back streets, Francesca noticed something disturbing, modern items in the hands of ordinary citizens. A woman carrying water in what appeared to be a plastic container disguised with woven material. A child playing with what looked suspiciously like a modified modern toy. "How many people know," she asked Numerius, "about the future, about the eruption?" "More than you might think," he admitted, "though only a trusted circle knows the full truth. We've been strategic about sharing certain innovations that might help with survival without causing panic or disrupting society too severely." They arrived at a small temple on the outskirts of town. Inside, away from public view, the priest had created what could only be described as a laboratory. Tables covered with black crystals, astronomical charts, and when the priest approached, speaking rapidly to Numerius in Latin, his expression grew concerned. "There's a problem," he told him. "The mountain's activity is affecting the passages. The gateway you use is unstable. It may not reopen as scheduled." "Then we're trapped here," Francesca said, her heart sinking. "Not necessarily." Numerius indicated a doorway at the rear of the temple. "The priests can create a new passage, but it requires considerable energy in precise conditions. And with the mountain active," another tremor shook the building, stronger than before. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. "We don't have much time," the priest said in accented Italian. "The ceremony must begin now if you wish to return today." What followed was unlike anything Francesca could have imagined. A fusion of ancient ritual and what seemed like primitive scientific understanding. The priest positioned the crystals in specific patterns, burning oils that filled the chamber with pungent smoke. They chanted in a language that wasn't Latin, something older and more obscure. As the ceremony progressed, the air in the doorway began to shimmer, like heat rising from sun-baked stone. Through the distortion, Francesca could glimpse what appeared to be the modern archaeological site, the ruins of this very temple. "It's working," Matteo whispered. But another violent tremor rocked the building. Cracks appeared in one wall, and several crystals tumbled from their positions. The shimmering gateway flickered. "The alignment is failing," the lead priest warned. "The passage will collapse soon." "You must go now," Numerius urged them. "We will be fine. This is not the great eruption, merely a warning." Francesca hesitated. "But what about the historical timeline? If you evacuate early, if you save people who were supposed to die..." Numerius smiled sadly. "Perhaps this is how it always happened. Perhaps some of us were always meant to survive, hidden from your history books. Or perhaps," Matteo added quietly, "whatever changes occur have already been incorporated into the timeline we know. We can't be certain. Another tremor, more violent than before. Part of the ceiling collapsed at the far end of the chamber. No more time for philosophy. New Marius said firmly, "Go." As they moved toward the gateway, Francesca impulsively turned back. "Your journal, the one in your study, does it contain information about the future, technology, events, some..." New Marius admitted. "Why?" "You should destroy it," she urged. "If it survives, if archaeologists find it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You fear further contamination of the timeline. Very well, I will consider it." He clasped her hand. "Now go, before the way closes completely." The gateway was visibly shrinking, its edges wavering. Matteo stepped through first, vanishing into the shimmering air. Francesca took one last look at the living Pompeii around her, at New Marius and the priest still working frantically to maintain the passage. "History remembers you," she told him. "Your name survives. That's something." Then she stepped through, feeling that same waterfall sensation, and emerged into darkness. Final act, the return. For a disorienting moment, Francesca couldn't tell where or when she was. Then flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and she heard familiar voices calling her name. "Here! I found them!" It was Luca's voice. Flashlight beams bobbed toward them, revealing Luca, Elena, and Marco accompanied by park security officers. "What the hell, Francesca?" Elena rushed forward, embracing her. "We've been looking everywhere for you too. How long have we been gone?" Matteo asked, his voice hoarse. One of the security officers checked his watch. "Almost 8 hours since the park opened. Your friends reported you missing after finding your note about meeting early. 8 hours. It felt like only 2 or 3 in ancient Pompeii. We got lost exploring some off-limits areas," Matteo explained smoothly to the officers. "My fault entirely. I wanted to show her some research sites." The security team looked skeptical, but seemed more relieved than angry to have found them. As they were escorted back toward the main entrance, Francesca realized they had emerged in a completely different section of the park than where they'd entered the tunnel, nearly half a kilometer away. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Luca whispered, falling into step beside her. "Both of you. What really happened down there?" Francesca exchanged glances with Matteo. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me," Luca challenged, uncharacteristically serious. But before she could respond, their attention was drawn to commotion ahead. A group of archaeologists clustered around a freshly excavated area, voices raised in excitement. "What's happening?" Elena asked one of the security officers. "New discovery this morning," the officer replied. "They uncovered a sealed chamber that wasn't on any of the maps. Apparently contains perfectly preserved artifacts, unusual ones." Matteo grabbed Francesca's arm, his grip tight. "Which section?" "The Temple of Apollo Annex," the officer said. "Area has been closed off to visitors while they document everything." The temple, where they had just left New Marius and the priests performing their ritual. Breaking away from the group, ignoring calls to stop, Francesca and Matteo rushed toward the excavation site. They pushed through curious onlookers until they could see into the pit where archaeologists were carefully removing objects from a stone chamber. On a table nearby lay items already retrieved, and among them, unmistakably, was a leather-bound journal. "Is that..." Francesca whispered. "New Marius' journal." Matteo confirmed grimly. He didn't destroy it. One of the archaeologists was already turning its pages with gloved hands, her expression a mixture of confusion and wonder. "It's impossible," they heard her say to her colleague. The language shifts between ancient Latin and modern Italian. And the content, it can't be authentic. It describes events that wouldn't happen for centuries after Pompeii fell. We need to speak with the dig director, Matteo said urgently, pushing forward. I'm Matteo Russo, site guide and researcher. That journal belongs to the Archaeological Authority. A stern voice interrupted. A distinguished older woman in dust-covered clothes approached. And you, Senior Russo, are trespassing in a restricted excavation after going missing for hours. Security will escort you out. As guards move to remove them, Francesca caught a glimpse of something else on the table. A small black crystal, identical to those the priests had used in their ceremony. Director Belmonte, Matteo tried again desperately. You don't understand what you found. That journal contains. I know exactly what we found. Senior Russo, the director cut him off, lowering her voice. Just as I know about your uncle's experiences here decades ago. Francesca and Matteo froze. You think this is the first time objects like these have been discovered? Director Belmonte asked, her expression unreadable. There have been anomalies in Pompeii's archaeological record for generations. Items that shouldn't exist. Materials out of time. We catalog them. We study them privately, and we keep them from the public. You know about the passages, Francesca realized. The director's sharp eyes assessed her. We have theories. Nothing confirmable, of course, but enough incidents over the years to establish protocols. She nodded to the security team. These two will come with me. Tell their friends they're assisting with documentation of the new find. In her makeshift office, a converted storage room filled with maps and artifacts, Director Belmonte fixed them with a penetrating stare. Now, without the theatrical version you're preparing for your friends, tell me exactly what happened today. They told her everything. The voices, the tunnel, ancient Pompeii alive, new Marius and his knowledge of the future, the temporal gateways created by the priests. When they finished, the director was silent for a long moment, absently turning a pottery shard over in her hands. In 1943, she finally said, my grandfather was working on an excavation here when Allied bombs fell nearby. The vibrations opened a sealed chamber similar to the one found today. Inside was a clay tablet with writing that made no sense. Latin mixed with phrases from what was later identified as 15th century Neapolitan dialect. It described Vesuvius in unprecedented detail. Details that wouldn't be scientifically understood for centuries. She set down the pottery. Since then, there have been at least 7 similar incidents, discoveries of objects or texts that suggest temple contamination. Most have been classified, locked away in museum vaults, dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. But you believe they're real, Matteo said. I believe Pompeii guards secrets we're only beginning to understand. Her gaze was steady, including how certain individuals seem to have anticipated eruption with uncanny precision. The archaeological evidence has always shown signs of preparation that didn't match the historical narrative of sudden disaster. Francesca thought of new Marius evacuation drills, his maps of safe zones. So some of them did survive, perhaps, or perhaps their preparations came too late. The director shrugged. The historical record remains largely intact, which suggests either their attempts failed or their success was always part of history. Matteo finished. A stable time loop. Director Belmonte nodded. The multiverse theory would suggest we've simply shifted to a slightly different timeline, where their actions were always part of history. But that's philosophy, not archaeology. She fixed him with a stern look. What matters now is containing this information. I'll need detailed statements from both of you, and your agreement to complete confidentiality. You're going to cover it up? Francesca asked, surprised. I'm going to study it carefully, away from sensation-seeking media and pseudoscientific exploitation. The director corrected, just as we've done with similar findings for decades. Before they could object, she continued, Consider the consequences if this became public. Mass tourism attempting to find temporal gateways. Damage to the archaeological site. Religious fanatics claiming divine intervention. It would be chaos, and all scientific value would be lost in the frenzy. She wasn't wrong. Francesca had to admit. What about the journal? Matteo asked. It contains information about our time, technology, future events. It will be secured, the director assured them. Accessible only to a small research team with appropriate clearance. As they left the director's office, rejoining their worried friends with carefully constructed explanations about getting lost, and then helping document a new find, Francesca felt the weight of their experience settling into something between dream and reality. That evening, as the four friends sat at a restaurant in Naples, the conversation flowed around her. Luca dramatizing their rescue mission, Elena planning their next day's activities, Marco scrolling through photos they'd taken at Pompeii. "Hey, that's weird," Marco said suddenly, showing his phone to the group. "This picture I took yesterday, after you wandered off. There's someone behind you, Francesca, but when I zoom in, the image showed her standing near the wall where she'd first heard the voices. Behind her, partially visible, was a figure in what could have been a toga, but its features were blurred, as though caught in motion. Probably just another tourist." Elena said dismissively, "In a toga?" Marco zoomed in further. "And look at his face. It's completely distorted." Luca grabbed the phone. "Whoa, creepy. Maybe Pompeii really is haunted." Francesca met Matteo's eyes across the table. Neither spoke. Later that night, as she stepped on the balcony of their rented apartment for some air, she found Matteo already there, gazing toward the distant silhouette of Vesuvius against the night sky. "Do you still hear them?" he asked quietly. "The voices." She listened inwardly for a moment, then shook her head. "No, they're gone." "I've been thinking about new Marius," Matteo said. "About what he might have done with the knowledge he gained from my uncle, from other visitors. If he and others actually survived by using that information, then they could have established communities elsewhere." Francesca continued his thought, bringing with them knowledge that was ahead of their time, which might explain certain historical anomalies, technological advances that seemed to appear suddenly, architectural innovations that happened earlier than they should have. Francesca considered this. Or maybe they did all perish in the eruption, despite their preparations. Maybe history remained intact. "We'll never know for certain," Matteo acknowledged. "The director will make sure the journal and other evidence remain classified, studied only by a select few." "Is that wrong?" Francesca asked, "Keeping the truth hidden?" Matteo was silent for a long moment. "Truth is complicated, especially when it involves things science can't yet explain." He turned to face her. "What will you tell your friends?" She looked through the glass doors to where Luca and Elena were choosing a movie to watch, entirely unaware that history itself might have been altered that day. "Nothing they would believe," she said with a small smile. "Some voices are only meant for certain ears." As she spoke, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was from an unknown number, a text containing only geographic coordinates. When she entered them into her map app, they mark a location in the hills outside modern Naples, far from Pompeii, but with a clear view of Vesuvius. The satellite image showed what appeared to be ancient ruins, unexcavated, unknown to tourists. Beneath the coordinates was a short message. Some voices echo across time. Some survivors write their own history. If you wish to learn more, come alone. Francesca stared at the screen, then at Vesuvius in the distance, the mountain that preserved a moment in time, but perhaps not in a way history had always told. The voices had gone silent, but their message remained. Under Vesuvius, the past was not as dead as everyone believed, and somewhere, in ruins yet undiscovered, answers waited for those who could hear them. The end.